and officers, and to say thank you for being here. And what I will say before we go any further is that the meeting is not being live streamed, but it will be recorded and published online following the meeting. Obviously, if you want to speak, please raise your hands. And if I don't see it, then I'm sure Liz will. And that's more likely to happen than for me to see it, I must admit. And I hope to get the mic right most of the time today as well, but I won't promise that. Yeah? Just for the benefit of people who are online, I'll ask everybody in the room to introduce themselves, if I may. So, I'm Councillor Paxton Hurd-Williams. I'm chairing this Child and Family Services Scrutiny Panel meeting today. It's on my left.
Liz Jordan, Scrutiny Officer.
I'm Lindsay Margetson, Principal Officer for Safeguarding and Child and Family.
Julie Davies, Head of Child and Family Services.
Councillor Louise Gibbard, Cabinet Member for Care Services.
Sandra Joy, Councillor for Uplands.
Councillor Wendy Lewis for Warnarloth Ward.
Dave Howes, Director of Social Services.
Thank you. I remember to turn my phone off, my mic off then, so they could see you as well. So it was good. Okay, let's move on to the agenda then, if we may. Item 1, apologies for absence, please, Liz, if we have any.
We haven't received any, Chair.
Okay, thanks. We'll move on. Item 2 is disclosures of interest. Has anybody got any interest that they would like to declare? I'm not seeing any hands at all. So in that case, I move on to item 3, which is prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. Again, there's nothing, I think, to be said on that one. So straight on to item 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Obviously, everybody's had the opportunity to go through those. I'm not going to go through them one by one, but if anybody has any problems with those at this point in time, could you put your hand up now and just let us know? If not, we'll assume that they're true and an accurate reflection of the meeting. I'm going to mention a little bit on letters in particular, because there was one item in terms of the letters which we did not actually discuss at the last meeting. It was raised afterwards, basically, and that was the situation with the young person's belongings and how they carried. Obviously, you will have seen the reply from the cabinet member, Louise, and but I think really because we haven't had a chance to discuss it, I will take this opportunity to give members the opportunity to ask any questions, if they may. So in that case, what I will do now then is, you've read the letter. Have you got any questions? Has anybody got any questions they want to raise in respect to it?
It wasn't a question, it was just to say thank you for the comprehensive response. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for officers for supplying it, and just hopefully everyone's reassured that this is a really serious issue, and take young people's private property, and that they've got that sense of belonging when they move from place to place. Obviously you don't want to see things stuffed in bags or anything like that. It's that would not show the care and support that they deserve.
Yeah, Sandra said we were grateful for the response. Obviously, I would be saying that now anyway as well myself. So in that case, no further questions, no comments at all. I will move on to item 6, which is public question time. I don't know if we've had any questions, Liz. Just for a change, it seems we haven't had any questions. So item 7 is a first really major item on the agenda in that respect, substantive. The update from the Regional Safeguarding Board. I think you're going to lead on this, David, but I don't know if Louise wants to say something first of all. Nope. Okay. All yours, David.
Thank you, Chair. So what the committee has before them is a copy of the annual report of the Regional Safeguarding Board. This report is submitted to the National Independent Safeguarding Board, which is charged with reporting to Welsh Government on the overall effectiveness of safeguarding arrangements in Wales. So this is part of the evidence base that National Independent Safeguarding Board use. They receive a similar report from all boards, and then they undertake other activities through the year to inform their analysis and feedback, and then any recommendations either to Welsh Government or back to individual boards. It's a comprehensive report. I always find it a bit difficult to summarise when we get this report each year, but just a reminder to members, the board by its very nature is a partnership arrangement across the region with all the statutory partners, and then third sector organisations, etc. I suppose the overall focus of the board is concentrating on facilitating the conditions in which that collaborative work takes place, a bit at an operational level. So, you know, some work on things like the policies that we all apply, some work on audit activity of stuff that's going on, some very specific work if there are any particular concerns that lead to either child or adult practice reviews. But most of the focus is at that strategic level, you know, making sure that organisations are working well together, or trying to create the conditions where organisations are working well together. And then I suppose an attempt, and this is always a challenge for all boards, at some sort of performance management or performance oversight of that collaborative effort. And that's always tricky. All the organisations have their own performance management arrangements. And of course, part of the focus of this committee is a particular focus on, well, how is children's services in particular operating? So they extracting all of that information and then taking a view on how the collaborative space is working. That's something boards always struggle with, and I know it's a thing that vexes our chair. How do you quite get into the detail or make some judgments as a scrutiny committee on how effective that board is working or not? It's a similar challenge that I'm sure the National Independent Safeguarding Board have. The way the board operates, there are probably fair to say two main chairs. So I'm one of the chairs, my equivalent in Neath Talbot. We try to operate a co-chair like arrangement, but there are particular responsibilities put on directors of social services. So myself and my equivalent in Neath Talbot act as those main chairs, but we do have vice chairs, but we operate more of a co-chairing relationship. And again, that's that trying to get that ethos across the key statutory partners, that we're all in it together. We all have a collective responsibility, both in terms of the effectiveness or not of our own individual organisations, but in particular how we come together as a partnership. So that's why we try to engender a co-chairing arrangement. But there is a hierarchy that applies just because of that additional responsibility that falls to statutory directors of social services. The main work of the board is delivered through the 4 subgroups that are referenced in the report. So there is a training management group that again tries to create some oversight of ensuring that individual organisations are delivering against their training responsibilities, but also again tries to bring together some collective work that focuses on, you know, creating some space and opportunities for the organisations to learn together around what effective safeguarding can look like. There's a quality and performance management group. Historically, as I've already referenced, we've struggled a bit in that performance management group as how do you get some added value from the individual organisation performance management oversight that takes place. I'll come back to that. Probably historically and still to date, some of the most effective performance oversight that that group provides audit activity that it facilitates. So that's on top of any audit activity that will take place in individual organisations. That group also facilitates some multi-agency audit activity. There is a development in train though, where the National Independent Safeguarding Board commissioned some work on effectively what should a performance management infrastructure be for boards, and could we standardize that? So take a view on what that could look like, standardize it, and then be able to monitor performance across boards, so effectively across the whole of Wales, and take a view on what effective performance oversight should look like. I suppose my best description of that. That's a bit of a work in progress. It isn't fully mature yet, but I suspect the chair and you as a committee will quite like that when that's up and running, because you'll get something more tangible in the annual reporting, hopefully, that will enable you to dive a bit more into the detail of the effectiveness of the board or not, and the effectiveness overall of regional safeguarding in our area. I'm pleased to say that whilst the boards across Wales as a collective have kind of posed some challenges about whether the framework is deliverable or not, our board to date has stood out a bit in that we have been able to, I think, respond to the majority, if not all of that. Lindsay's nodding good, so that's all of it, and we're a bit ahead of the game in that regard. That's that's good, but we'll wait to see whether the operationalization of that new framework, across all the boards gives us something different going forward, some extra assurance. If it doesn't give that assurance across the whole of Wales, I think we'll get some richness of a different data analysis in this region. And again, I'll come back to, I think this board, or this committee, sorry, will appreciate sight of that and that new approach. So that's a good development that's in train. And there's a policy and procedure practice management group. So that, as the title describes, that particularly focuses on keeping policies up to date. So that's policies that have existed for a long time but need regular review and updating. But in particular, I suppose in terms of adding value, that works on developing policies when there are new and emerging issues. So again, that's an effective subgroup. And then probably one of the most important subgroups is the practice review management group. So that's the group that carries out those very in-depth reviews that take place when there is a cause for concern. So in most serious end of the spectrum, that would be the death of a child, where safeguarding, there are concerns about safeguarding practice and perhaps some contributory factors that need to be analysed. But it goes lower down that it's a kind of stepped process, so it's not always the most significant level of concerns, but where there are where agencies pick up potential concerns and learning, then they get referred through to that subgroup. There are particular criteria that are set in legislation and guidance as to whether a review, whether it meets the criteria for a review. Probably where we'd want reassurance in our region, and us as or you as a committee would be, well, are we making sure that we're I suppose attuned to picking up on the kinds of issues that prompt a referral? So if you don't pick up that there is a potential concern and then refer it through to that particular group, then we potentially miss opportunities. And again, we've kept a focus on that as a board, and we stack up well again comparatively with other boards. So lots of things get referred through, which is reassuring for us. Doesn't mean that everything ends up with a review, but it does give some reassurance that individual agencies and indeed individual practitioners and managers are looking out for, well, this might be a cause for concern. We're going to refer it through to the group. The group then makes its decision about whether one of the types of review need to be carried out or not. And then we get the findings from those reviews. Again, there are some developments in trains, as referenced in the report. Welsh Government are wanting to take forward a new approach to these reviews, which is described as a single unified safeguarding review. So what effectively they've said is they're really pleased with the way that strengths-based child practice reviews and adult practice reviews have been developed in safeguarding boards. And then they're contrasting that with some of the other types of reviews that are carried out, domestic homicide reviews being an example of that, and saying for Wales, we would just like one single approach based on the way that child and adult practice reviews have been carried out, with the presumed added benefit of there are occasions when more than one review is carried out. So you might have a domestic homicide review overseen by Community Safety Partnership, and then you might have a child or adult practice review overseen by the safeguarding boards. And Welsh Government took the view that that's unhelpful. That's potentially putting families and individuals through processes that an unnecessary level of intrusion and oversight. So I've taking through new legislation and guidance that says in Wales we will just have a single approach. That's quite a challenging endeavour, not least because some of those reviews are overseen by UK government. So the Home Office, for example, domestic homicide review, whereas safeguarding reviews generally are delegated to Welsh Government oversight. So there's been complicated negotiations between Welsh Government and UK Government. We think all of those obstacles have been overcome. There is still some concern within all safeguarding boards, but our safeguarding board as well, is that that's going to add, whilst we might agree with the theory behind it, it's going to add considerable business to the boards. So there's a worry about our capacity and our resources to be able to deal with all of that activity. So again, that's work in train, and by the time you get to next year's review, you should be reflecting as a committee on the success or not of that approach, the challenges that boards have faced delivering against those new responsibilities. Other things that are captured in the report, which I'm not going to labour, it sets out the priorities for the board over the next couple of years, and then also talks to some of the innovations that this region is trying to take forward, though, and in particular they are things like much more of a focus on the voice of young people and parents and families and their involvement in safeguarding practice and what they can contribute to us developing our practice in the region. So that's a particular area of interest that we've tried to take forward in various ways, and also an area that you've certainly had reports on as a committee. So the developments in safeguarding practice that moves beyond just an interest in safeguarding around children in their family context, but safeguarding within a wider community. So you would have had reports on our work on facilitated through the CMET team. Well, there's some reflections on what that whole approach. So it talks a bit about what we've done in CMET, but it also talks about what's been happening in NIPATOL, but it's equivalent of developing that kind of work. So they're probably two of the innovations I pull out, albeit there are more that are referenced in the report. I wasn't planning to say any more, Chair, but I will give Lindsay and Julie an opportunity to comment if they want to, as two members of the boards, and also I know Lindsay's member of some of the subgroups as well. So I'll stop.
That's what I would, thanks Dave and thanks Chair. What I would add to today's comments is that there's some really good practice highlighted in here. As today's mentioned, the work around contextual safeguarding, and that highlights the excellent practice in Swansea as well as in Newport Talbot, but also we are, I guess, leading on some really interesting work around how we improve information sharing amongst partners. So the multi-agency safeguarding system, acronym MAST, Welsh Government are interested in what that might mean. It's an IT solution to help us get better at sharing information. I also should have said before I started, it's National Safeguarding Week this week. So it's a good opportunity to remind people about that. Very timely it's come here at this point. So for us to reflect on that and think about how we could improve awareness around safeguarding in our communities while we're out and about. And the other couple of things I just wanted to say was that our regional parental advocacy network has also been recognised as a really good way. PAN is the acronym, but that's where parents are actively involved in sharing their experiences of the safeguarding system. And that's helping us learn not just operationally, but also through the safeguarding board about things we could do better and differently. And again, that's something as a national initiative, Welsh Government are learning from lots of different models, and they're learning from this model that we've led on through our region. So there's, if you can take the time to pull out the really good practice, there's some fantastic stories in there about things we're doing really well, as well as acknowledging areas where we continue to seek improvement to achieve the best outcomes. Thanks, Chair.
Lindsay?
Can I jump on
Yeah,
that
of course.
one? Yeah, thanks, Dave, for the update. In terms of the QPRG Quality Practice and Review Group, in terms of the performance you were talking about, we had an updated meeting this morning. It is really exciting. Like Dave said, across all of the subgroups, we are further ahead within our region than other regions. And our performance, we're kind of getting down to the T now, which is really good to hear. So it's nice to see all of the organisations coming together to do that. And following on from what Julie said in relation to PAN, the Parent Advocacy Network, we've got the PPAS service, which is launched, which is for parent peer support for parents who their children are going to be placed on the Child Protection Register. So it's an advocacy service for them and a support service. And I'll go into that a bit more detail later on as well for my report. But there's lots of work going on across all of the subgroups, and we are doing really well.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions they want to ask at this point in time, any members? Oh, sorry, Mike. Yes, I can see your hand up there now.
Thank
The floor is
you.
yours.
Thank you. First of all, it's pleasing to see the progress and the fact that in terms of the benchmarking with others, we're doing well. And as Julie mentioned, though, there's always room for improvement. So the comments or questions that I've got are meant to just push that forward a little bit, if I may. Just to kind of, I've got a few questions. So would you like them all in one go, as it were, or shall I take them one by one?
Probably better in that case to take them one by one, and then we can move on quietly, roll along from one to the other.
Yeah, okay, just a purely administrative one. I note that the report is watermarked draft. Has it been signed off as finalised, or if not, who is the responsible body for doing that, and when will that happen?
Sorry, press the wrong button. It will be signed off by the Safeguarding Board at its next meeting.
Okay, thank you, Julie. The other thing I just wanted to ask, in terms of obviously a number of partners and members of the board and so on and so forth, and within the context of our scrutiny from the council's perspective, are you happy with the engagement of all of the partners currently?
Yes, we're certainly for the overarching board. We have good representation at board meetings. We do monitor attendance. I think we have some challenges at different times around facilitating all of the subgroups work and that's generally in the context of all of the organisations are really busy. Any representation of the subgroups from any of our organisations, including ours, is always work on top of the day job. So there are challenges at different times. What does work well, though, is that when we have issues like that, they are escalated to the board. Directors and other senior managers step in and reinforce the importance of, well, we have got to prioritise this work, and but it is a challenge in the context of pressures on public services. So it'd be wrong not to acknowledge that. But nevertheless, as both Julie and Lindsay have reinforced, despite those challenges, loads and loads of exceptional work has been progressed in this region. So challenges, but we are managing to overcome them, and we are making progress in a difficult space.
Okay, thank you. Just following that up, with the involvement of education, notice on the attendance table on page 28 of the report, I think it's 41 in our bundle of papers, that education had missed a number of meetings. Is that as a result of the pressures that they've been experiencing, and maybe staff not being available, and has that been addressed now?
So yes, it will have been challenges around organisational changes, pressures back at the ranch has been escalated. Messages have been reinforced, and we would expect things to improve, but it happens from time to time. Is the reality of it.
Okay, thank you. Just following up again in terms of the engagement of board members and the different organisations. Clearly, from our perspective as a council, we have the opportunity through this scrutiny panel to look at the report and raise questions. How is the annual report dealt with in other partner organisations?
Similar fashion, but in the end, the report is written for the National Independent Safeguarding Board, and to inform their statutory requirement of reflecting back to Welsh Government on the effectiveness of safeguarding arrangements. So there will be scrutiny arrangements in Neath Talbot Council, very similar to our own. In the Health Board, it will go through the Health Board's own internal safeguarding monitoring arrangements as part of how they internally monitor, and similar within the police. So whilst there isn't that public scrutiny in the same way as you have within a council, there are equivalent-ish boards within those organisations that provides their own reassurance. And then when they're inspected against the effectiveness or not of their internal safeguarding arrangements, this is one of the things that they would provide as evidence of towards their statutory responsibilities as well.
Yeah, I guess that in the same way in which we would expect the comments that are being made today to be fed back to the Western Morgan Safeguarding Board, I would guess that the other organisations would do something similar and feed back into the Safeguarding Board any comments from the constituent organisations.
Absolutely. If there are any specific recommendations that any of those committees or boards have, yes, absolutely, that would come back to the Safeguarding Board.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the safeguarding priorities, which are listed on page 10 through to 13 in the report, I welcome the fact that you've identified things that you need to be looking at and what you want to achieve from the outcome of that particular focus. Is there an action plan to support that? For example, who would be accountable for or tasked with the completion and implementation of those various outcomes, and a time scale and that sort of thing, or is it all the responsibility of the limited number of staff who support the safeguarding board?
So in terms of the subgroups, we have an action plan. Every time there are recommendations going forward, it's added to that with a name delegated and a time frame, and each subgroup will have an individual action plan, and each meeting on a 6-weekly basis, we revisit that action plan to make sure that the recommendations are tracked and followed through and completed within those timescales.
Okay, thank you. And finally, you'll be pleased to know, I think we can't underestimate, can we, the reality of the situation that what we're talking about is individuals and families who would be at the focus of all of the work that's being undertaken. Just as a question for, I suppose it's more of an operational thing, but who would track an individual where perhaps they are, let's say, being dealt with by a variety of different organisations that are listed in the report? Is there just kind of one support worker, caseworker, who would then do the coordination with the various bodies, or how does that work?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you understand? In terms of individual
An individual
people?
who might, individual people, yeah. So if somebody's the subject of a safeguarding query, who would be, and maybe is in the focus of a number of organisations, different organisations, how is that dealt with?
So if we're talking about, so for example, a child that's at risk of being exploited, that would ordinarily be referred into the local authority children's services, and then for an example such as that, we would have a multi-agency strategy discussion and then bring in expertise through our contextual missing exploited trafficked operational group to ensure that there's a multi-agency response. But ordinarily the main lead person, as a case coordination, so to speak, would be social service, children's social services in that particular example, and then it would be adults. If it was adults, if we're then talking about concerns relating to adults, in relation to persons in a position of trust, then the employer would take the lead on taking forward any issues in relation to that individual, but the oversight would be through the local authority designated officer. Sometimes that's joint for children and adults, sometimes it's single, one for child, one for adults, but they would have responsibility for oversight to ensure that things that were raised were tracked and actioned accordingly and in line with legislation and regulations.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay, Mike, thanks for those questions and thanks for the answers. Certainly food for thought, but I think just to put that into context in terms of what Mike has said there, I think from the point of view of this particular scrutiny performance panel, the oversight of or the overview of safeguarding has been seen as being very important, because it goes back to the time when we were put it through special measures by the intervention board, at which time it was considered that the Swansea safeguarding board was not that particularly effective. And one of the things that came out of the intervention board was that the head of chief executive of Swansea, together with the chief superintendent in Swansea, the police, and I'm not quite sure who it was in the health board, came together to reform the Swansea safeguarding board as such. And the thinking behind that was that they were the people who controlled all the resources that enabled safeguarding to be properly carried out. If they instructed their people to work in one way, they were expected to work in that way, because it was coming from the head of of that particular service. And therefore it really did develop and became a very strong body. I'm sure there's some people, David, you'll probably remember that better than anybody else, in that they were very effective in making sure that the overview of safeguarding was properly carried out. And we did have real concerns at the time when there was a move away from a Swansea safeguarding board to the regional safeguarding board, and we asked for measures to be put in place if possible. And in fact, Swansea set up its own committee, which was called a Protection Committee, as I remember it, and that was under the aegis of the Chief Executive. So that is why it's very important, as far as I'm concerned, and I think it should be as far as this committee is concerned, that we do get this annual safeguarding report that that comes round. I was almost going to say every year, but that'd be a bit obvious to say that. Having said that, this report is obviously very comprehensive, and I think the questions that have come out of it in many ways have already been asked by Mike in that sense. My concern up to a point is that when we look at this, there are no sort of measurements in terms of how successful you are in making sure you are safeguarding in that sense. There's no metrics there. There's nothing that we can judge against, and it is based on opinion. And that's from my point of view, and I'm sure that's the way certainly the scrutiny panel has worked, is that we are very interested in metrics, so we can look and see what is coming out of it and how we can see the trends. So it's just something perhaps you might like to think about as to what metrics can go into this report to give us a specific numeric rather than an opinion in terms of how things are. I think that's the best way of putting it. So just a thought for the future. I don't know if anybody else has got anything more you're going to add. I'm not seeing any hands up anywhere.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come back in on the back of that and just add, in terms of the metrics, we do have that working in the background, and to offer reassurance, as part of our quality assurance, we look at the work that's undertaken and also undertake deep dives in certain areas so that we can kind of map out the journey and the outcomes. So that work does take place, but I appreciate what you're saying, and it would be nice to see that in the report, but just to offer reassurance that that work does take place in the background.
I'm not sure how big that report would come and the amount it would increase this, but it might be just if every year into this report you put one of those sets of metrics in so we could see. Just a thought for the future. Yeah. Anybody got any other questions? In that case, I'll say thank you, David, for that, and thank you, officers, for the responses. And I will now move on to the next item on the agenda. If I look at the right bit of paper, which is the Service Quality Unit Annual Report. And I guess, Lindsay, you're going to take us through that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I won't take everybody through the report because you've all got a copy of that, but I've just pulled a summary together to share that similarly to the Independent Review and Officer report, the Service Quality report has been updated to capture more qualitative data around what matters to children and young people along with their outcomes, so that you can see that in the report. The data is obviously for the financial year, so this report is a few months old. I just wanted to share that. It doesn't share our figures as it is today. So the report breaks down the role of the independent reviewing officer, along with the Child Protection Conference chairs within the Service Quality Unit, which is based in Cockett House. It gives examples on how the team have worked creatively to engage children and young people that they work with, along with including their feedback following their service review of care experienced children. And you'll see that in the outcomes. It's important to note that the questionnaire is voluntary for children. So as they come into the SQU, they're asked at that point to complete the questionnaire, which they all agree to, but some of the questions they don't want to answer, so they will leave it blank, and that's where the not answered comes in. So I just wanted to offer reassurance there as you're going through the report. So the past year, the team has worked extremely busy implementing the changes following their service review. Following the initial questionnaire, it asks the young person kind of what they want out of the reviews, how they want it to look, how they want it to be captured. There are examples within the report where the independent reviewing officers and the child protection chairs are being more creative to engage our children and young people. So in relation to care experienced children, all of the young people engaged in their reviews within the year, which is a huge increase to last year. Last year was 90%. So that's really good that we're now everybody that comes through the door is happy to engage and plan for their looked after reviews. And for children that are on the child protection register, last year, I think one person engaged in their safety planning, whereas this year we've had 5 individuals engaging with their safety planning. Although that's still quite low, we're looking at developing across that area as we have done with our care experience children. So the IROs and the CP chairs have also had a young person's engagement event at Cocket House on 2 occasions this year. They play games, interact, and just kind of soften it a bit. So they're not within meetings and within that strict forum, but they're taking their stance and doing activities that they choose and gaining feedback along with our children's rights and participation officer, who also attends and encourages and promotes young people to engage. We've also got the parent peer advocacy support service, which I mentioned earlier. So that is now set up and running. They are seeing referrals coming through, and there's going to be an update on the notice board within Cocket for parents to see. So at the point a child is registered, parents will be asked if they would like to have representation and any support, so that any meetings that they would have somebody with them and not feel so isolated, because it can be a really difficult process for them to go through. There is further work around advocacy for children, but what we're finding is the independent reviewing officers and the CP chairs have such good relationships with their children. They are declining advocacy because they don't want to introduce another new person to their lives, and they feel as though their voices are being heard within our new systems. So that's a positive, but also further to development, just to make sure that everybody gets that offer. In relation to data, there's been a slight reduction in our CP. You'll see that in the figures and also with our care experience children. Again, it's reduced further today as the figures are to today's date. So the number of children on the child protection register for 23-24 was 228 in comparison to 22-23, where it was 263. So that's a slight drop, and today it's at 203. So that's the live figure from today. Deregistrations, so 23-24 is 255. So there's a drop there. And we've got our care experience children. So for 23-24, we had 490 compared to 480 this year. As it is at today, we are 481. So review meetings for our care experienced children also increased, whereas in 22-23 we completed 987. This year we've completed 1,046, which is amazing considering the capacity issues we've had in the team. But it just goes to show that young people are engaging, and we're getting out there a lot more, and the review meetings are positive. So in terms of the figures, I would say that we're remaining stable and consistent across the areas, with further work to be developed. We need to understand the reasons why children and young people become looked after, and also understanding how we increase safety for those that are on the child protection register due to being at the risk of harm. And I guess this understanding the background implications in terms of substance misuse. So if a child is on the register due to neglect, is that because a parent has got substance misuse issues, and how we can intervene at an earlier date to be able to try and prevent that. So we're looking at inputting those measures and doing that further work at the moment. Another area of focus is to increase engagement with children who are involved in the child protection arena, similarly to those who are our care experience. So the review that we've undertaken with the questionnaire, we'd like to mirror that across child protection for them to be better involved with their safety planning. And also looking at education from our care experienced children. When they are on reduced timetables, what does that look like for them? How do we support them with that? And I know it's something we keep repeating, but it's something that we are now looking to develop. We are linking in with Becky Benny to be able to do that, along with our children's rights participation officer. So I guess all of those areas are working a lot better together to understand and pull that information together so that the work can progress in that area. And that's my overall summary. Has anybody got any questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Lindsay and the team for the report. I know some of us have looked at this in corporate parenting already, and I think I'm sure everyone will agree it's really lovely to see those case studies in particular and how hard the team are working to look at this creatively and sensitively to really get those conversations with children and people and get their views in what is potentially a difficult and stressful time, and the work that's being done with parents and families as well. So yeah, that's just my thanks, and put that on record.
Hey, any members got any questions? You're getting away a bit light here at the moment. Sorry, Mike, you got your hand up?
Yeah, so sorry to come back. But I think thanks very much for the report, and I think it was really heartening to hear about the engagement of young people in the whole process as well. I think part of my question, which I asked earlier about the focus on an individual child in this particular context, was answered in the section in your report about one plan for every child. It's heartening to hear that there is that focus in terms of making sure that systems are integrated and plans are put in place. I suppose I just wanted to ask you a question in terms of the challenges that you face within the service, Julie and Dave in particular, for staffing in terms of being able to ensure consistency of engagement by an individual, a named individual, with a child in these contexts, particularly when you're faced with potential recruitment difficulties, and obviously, the course of people having illnesses and annual leave. So I just wondered how you feel about the challenges you're facing within the service in making sure that a child has that consistency of care.
Judy?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Mike. I think I would summarise my how I feel about staffing challenges in this particular part of my service as very hopeful. We've gone through quite a lot of change over the last year, and there's been some personnel that have moved on, but we've been able to be quite successful in recruiting permanent replacements. And I'd say that I've heard some lovely stories of, as a person just returned from maternity leave, and they're the independent reviewing officer for quite a young looked after child, but they know this child so really, really well, and they've been able to pick up their story quite quickly and be part of the planning for that child in terms of their move on to their next part of their journey. And I think they've got some really strong leadership in that area, not just through Lindsay, but through the two managers. So I'm very hopeful, and also had quite a lot of success in getting agency covering when we've needed it. So it's an area that doesn't have such significant recruitment challenges as perhaps some of our frontline social work teams, but nevertheless, I think our reputation of having signs of safety and a strengths-based approach is quite attractive to people. So yes, I remain very hopeful about our staffing going forward and how we're developing as a service and being so child-led in our thinking and our planning, and our practice in this statutory part of the service. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, and just thanks for that response. It's heartening to hear that, and it's your opportunity as well, I think, Julie, to perhaps raise issues with us as a scrutiny panel, and with the cabinet member sitting alongside you if there were issues that you wanted us to take forward on your behalf.
I have to say to that, Mike, I think we will always discuss our work programme with the head of the service before we bring it to you for your approval, and we will have done that anyway as a matter of course, Julie, I think, in that sense. One thing about this report which brings about for us something that doesn't often happen, and there is talk there of IROs in particular, which is something that we very rarely talk about, and I know Sandra probably knows a lot more about that than I do, but that's another story. But it does bring into question also the situation in respect of transition, the role of Bay's 16+ team, because there was a time when we seriously were thinking of recommending from this panel that should be brought in-house, and that at the end of the day, it was decided to keep things as they were, David. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we have recently, I think in the last 2 years, we've brought in-house the care leaver service.
You have brought it in.
Mm.
Oh, that's interesting because nobody's ever told us that before. But certainly, I'm going back. Oh, Sue, what would be about 8-10 years when they were talking about it, I think.
Quite a long time ago, yes.
Yes. No, I wasn't aware, I must admit, that you've now brought it back in-house.
I'm sure we have reported on it. Maybe we haven't explicitly made that clear enough that when we've reported on it that it's now an in-house service.
In that case,
yeah,
now you're telling me I show my ignorance, in fact, but there we are. That's not unusual. But having said that, to come back that point again about transition, I think, certainly from child and family services to adult social services, I think is a point that we've always been concerned about. I hope that is being handled a lot better than it used to be. I could never understand why it couldn't be planned properly, because you obviously know when somebody's going to come to a specific age, so you should be able to plan towards that. Don't know if anybody else has got any questions about that, or you've got any comments to make about it yourself.
Sorry, I can see my hand going back and forth there. So it's included in the report in terms of the pathway planning and the transition over and how that support takes place. So the independent reviewing officers will bring that to the table to make sure that everybody is around and that plan is in place early enough. We can be better at that, and we are working on that, but it does work a lot better having Bays alongside us to be able to do that.
To be fair, I think those plans were always being said to be there, but I don't think they were always that effective at one time. Hopefully they are more effective now.
The other thing that we've introduced is a panel that oversees transitions that's chaired by a different principal officer, and because there's children within our children with disabilities team that also need to transition some of them over to adult services. So we have good adult services representation there, so we can aim to plan a lot earlier. And we've also recognised there's value in updating our transition policy that we have between child and family services and adult services, so we have clarity there and a reference point. So we're certainly continuing to learn and develop it together as child and family and adult services. So I think the introduction of that additional oversight has helped bring some additional safety in terms of making sure we're more timely in our planning for children and young people.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, I think the what's the name of it now? Service Transformation Committee's looking at transition as well, so that policy will come there. So potentially, once it's been through that process, it could come back to scrutiny to look back in the future.
Okay, thank you for the reassurance. Sandra.
Just ask for clarity on one thing. So things like the When I'm Ready schemes and things like that, are they all now in-house?
Yeah, When I'm Ready has been in-house for as long as I've been here. So it's a local authority responsibility, and what we have within Bays team, as it's called, in relation to our care experience young people, is a coordinator that works alongside and supports the statutory looks after children review process, but also inputs to the transitions work that I just mentioned. So we become better, and then it has to link into the fostering service as well. And then if it's an independent fostering agency, that's different dimensions. So we try to connect it all together through the transitions process with the When I'm Ready coordinator that sits in-house in Bays. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the reassurances. Obviously, I'm not seeing any more hands. So in that case, I'll say thank you very much for the report. Thank you very much for answering the questions. Certainly it's an interesting topic, and it's one that needs to be watched very closely, and hopefully we will continue to make sure, Mike, that we keep it in the work programme. But you can nag us on that if we forget about it. Okay, in that case, if I may, I'll move on to the final item on the agenda, basically, which is a work plan. I don't have to keep you, but I don't think it's going to take very long anyway. So just to say that the next meeting, which I haven't got in front of me at the moment, there we are, thank you, is an update on the Child and Family Improvement Programme, and we'll have a look at performance. So I'll have a few figures to look at for a change this, otherwise I'd be deprived otherwise, wouldn't I? The other thing I'll say is that we have already got a date in the diary for the budget meetings, which Liz will remind me of, because I'd have to look at my diary to remember. 17th of February. So if you could make a note of that in your diary for members, that's when we will be having a joint meeting with Sue's adult scrutiny panel, adult services scrutiny panel as well. So on that basis, anybody got any questions? If not, I will say thank you very much to everybody for their attendance and being here, both members and officers. Really is appreciated. Thank you for it very much. And close the meeting.
Thank you.
Bye.